I watched Bama and I watched Georgia yesterday, and these were not like main event games, but they're main event teams. Like both of these teams will figure in the SEC and national championship races. So Bama beat Middle Tennessee State pretty soundly. And I cannot tell you how many times people have told me Bama doesn't have a quarterback just because they hadn't settled on one. Bama doesn't have a quarterback. Half of my staff thinks that. Bama doesn't have a quarterback. Whatever you can prove against Middle Tennessee State, you decide that in your own mind. Jalen Milroe looked pretty good yesterday. Now, I have a set expectation for him. So he is not Bryce Young in my mind. Therefore, when he goes 13 of 18 for 194 through the air, and he added another 48 on the ground, had 5 total touchdowns, no interceptions, no turnovers. Like that, to me, is a great Jalen Milroe game. But there was a padlock stat in this game that totally went over everyone's head because you weren't watching, because it's a blowout. But if you remember Alabama games last year, watch this touchdown, by the way, total alien play. If you remember Bama games last year, and those of you who are Bama fans know where I'm going with this, there was something that probably drove you up a wall week after week after week, and that is the fact that they averaged nearly 8 penalties per game for about 70 yards per game. They had 2 penalties yesterday. And here's the padlock stat. None of them were on the offensive line, which is like the prayer emoji come to real life for Alabama fans. And it was the biggest mystery in the sport. How did Alabama all of a sudden become one of the most undisciplined teams in terms of penalties in college football? Well, several theories out there. And we're only through one game this year. That looks to have stopped. The energy their defense played with yesterday, I do not care if it was against air. The energy their defense played with yesterday, the physicality, the flying to the football, the aggressiveness, the technique tackling, it's been void. It just hasn't been there. And they went and hired Kevin Steele, and that was met with a collective ugh from people. Whatever it is they did between last year and this year, I just find that button and I keep on pressing it. Like Lawson has been there for a couple of years. He looked like a monster last night. And for the record, that's a guy in our team intel we kept on telling you about. Deontay Lawson at middle linebacker is a guy who's been like one of the stars of their fall camp. Yeah, keep him healthy, and that'll be one of the best players in college football this year. So remember back at SEC Media Days, I told you we talked to Nick Saban, and I got a pretty good read on how he felt about his coordinator hires. And it wasn't how the rest of America felt. The rest of America, and a lot of Alabama fans, frankly, looked at him hiring Tommy Rees as his OC and Kevin Steele as his DC, and they thought, oh, man, these are average to below average hires. And there are a lot of metrics out there, a lot of people who know how to grade that stuff that would agree with that. And I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying Nick Saban's different than pretty much anyone else. And so the vibe I got off Saban, without him outright saying it, was there are about 30 coordinators out there I can win with if I have the right team mentally, because I know how talented we are. So as long as I just have a team wired the right way, there are 30 different guys I can put an OC or a DC name tag on, and we'll be good. I think that's the kind of team he's got. And so it doesn't matter if it's Kevin Steele, doesn't matter if it's Tommy Rees, doesn't matter really who it is. He's got the right guys from a mental standpoint. At least it appears that way. And you know I felt that way throughout fall camp. So you know who they play this week? They play Texas this week. So any doubts you have, which is totally fair, like if you weren't sold after a Middle Tennessee State win, that's cool, you'll get them answered this week. That's the beauty of the sport. Again, we don't play one game, we play 12. So they got a big one this week. More on that a little bit later. Georgia played UT Martin. They won 48-7. They looked really sluggish offensively. Again, this is something we expected, kind of like with Ohio State. I expected Bama to look uglier than they did offensively, so that was a pleasant surprise. I got what I thought I'd get from Georgia. I got what I thought I'd get from Ohio State. That's why I'm not freaking out about them looking sluggish. But boy, I knew what was coming. I knew when Carson Beck didn't light the world on fire. I knew when that offensive line did not blow people off the ball, especially considering it's UT Martin. I knew what was coming. Mike Bobo hate was coming. And there is a long and storied track record between the Georgia faithful and Mike Bobo. He's got a history there, and they've got a history. And so when Kirby had him back in his program and then elevated him to OC, I knew when it happened. Yeah, it feels good now, but come fall, as soon as that offense doesn't hang half 100 in the first half against an inferior opponent, could happen in week 1. There's a question that's going to be relevant. And so Director Colin has pulled from the archives me doing the Lord's work. I knew it was coming, so I went ahead and I asked Kirby Smart 2 months ago this question. One of the hardest laughs I've had is when Todd Monken gets a job elsewhere. You've known Mike Bobo for like 700 years, and folks who have never met him a day in their life were mildly critical in saying, why didn't he conduct a national search? Why did he just elevate from within? Plus, we've seen Mike Bobo before. We want something new. I'm delivering that to you just in case you don't subscribe to the paper these days. So when you listen to that kind of stuff, what's your reaction? Other than saying, shut up.
I love it because I'm like, it's the same crowd that when Mel Tucker left said, who's Dan Lanning? And same crowd that when Dan Lanning left, who's Glenn Schumann? And you know, when we hired Todd Monken, there's not a lot of people that just were abundant with joy with that hire. So each hire is going to be graded based on the results and the outcomes. And to me, it's really I'm more process related. I'm more thinking of like, who's going to do the best job with our staff, who understands our staff, who gives us continuity, who's called it before, who's coached quarterbacks before. It was a really good fit, and we brought him in with the thought that if Monken ever left, we would be comfortable.
They got a new quarterback starting up there. They have got a new offensive coordinator, even though Mike Bobo's from the system. They are badly banged up, have been throughout the majority of fall camp, and they looked lethargic yesterday, and I'm going to give you the reason. It's because it's not Xbox, it's real life, and that stuff just happens in football sometimes. And I did not necessarily expect that I'd be the one having to defend Georgia and telling folks to calm down. Folks have labeled me a Georgia hater right now because I had the audacity to not predict someone to win a 3rd championship in a row. But I'm going to tell half of you who did pick them to win the title, they'll be fine. This team's going to be right there at the end of the year. They'll be fine. It may not look exactly the way you want it to every week. They'll be fine. There are people making decisions there that know what they're doing. They may just not have as good a team as they had the last 2 years. Like, does this occur to anybody? So UT Martin notwithstanding, they play Ball State this week. They're going to win that game, and there'll be some ups and some downs, and then they get into conference play. And I have this wild idea that that staff is handling the first 3 weeks of the season accordingly. Let me translate. I think you would have seen a different Georgia team yesterday if South Carolina was on the schedule. Call me crazy. I just believe that. I don't know why. Like, I believe Lincoln Riley would have handled the San Jose State game a little bit differently if it were Oregon in week 1. I just have a sneaking suspicion. So, yeah, actually, anyone who wants to sell their Georgia stock, I'll take some. I'd love to have some of that in my portfolio. I think they'll be fine.